Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the CSJ Center for Reconciliation and Justice, welcome back to the Playa Vista campus. No masks today. This is a treat. Perhaps the pandemic is finally turning around. Since this is the fifth take of this, obviously I'm still having trouble remembering what day or month or year it is, but that's been cut out. So let's all pretend I know exactly what's going on and what day it is. But we are screening the film 1,000 Pieces of Gold, a 1991 independent film which was workshopped at the Sundance Institute, based on the book by Ruth Ann Loom McCune, adapted for the screen by screenwriter Anne Makepeace, and directed by Nancy Kelly, who we will be joining us remotely here momentarily in an interview you conducted with her. That's a real treat. So let's just jump right into this. Rose, your thoughts about the film?
Well, I had seen it before. I read the book, but that was years ago. And I love Westerns, and that's what I thought it was at first. But I think it's so much more than that. It transcends that genre completely. But I like the story, but it's a shocking story in a way, because it shows human trafficking that has been going on for centuries, if not millennia. And this is based on a true story, and it's one woman's journey, but it symbolizes so many. I found it harrowing in parts, and other parts I found it very brave and courageous. And that even among people who are, how shall we say it, bad actors, there are good people as well. Even among people we would normally classify as sinners, there are good people.
This is not your traditional Western, though, I think, in the sense we think of one. This is not your John Wayne Western.
No.
What is it about this film that you think is different and are perhaps important to the Western genre?
Well, I love Westerns. I have loved Westerns since I was a little kid. I watched them on TV. I'd go up to our school recreation center on Saturdays for 10 cents. The first time I saw John Ford's 1956 epic, The Searchers, I was 7 years old, and I was so scared. I crawled under the metal folding chair when the little girl gets stolen from the cemetery. I was petrified, but I stayed with it because I just love Westerns. It's the white male hero for the most part. There's always something going on, some sort of crime or good guys, bad guys thing going on. There's so many aspects to being a Western, but I suppose mostly it's the backdrop, it's the landscape. So it's also the struggle with the landscape and the environment, whether that's a metaphor for the larger issue of westward expansion and manifest destiny, all these other things that we can talk about regarding Westerns that somehow get lost when you just talk about it as a genre. But this one takes place in Idaho, California, well, China to California to Idaho. Excuse me. And we're there in a mining town. And if that's not the epitome of at least post-1849 West, what is? It's, and it's, all the female characters for the most part are prostitutes, except for maybe one, the older lady. But it's, that was the reality of the times, and it takes place in the West, but the hero is a woman. It's not, it is the story of these men, but it's her story. She's the heroine. She's the one who survives. She's the one who transcends all of the terrible, horrific things that happen to her. In a way, it has a little bit of a Hollywood ending, kind of, right? It does. But I won't tell you what it is, what happens, but at least you know she doesn't die. But she doesn't ride off in, well, she kind of does.
Spoiler alert.
She kind of does ride off into the sunset. She just doesn't go very far. But anyway, so that in that way it's a different, but she's the woman who's struggling against men who are trying to make it in their get money so they can go back to their families. Some are just there to make the money. Some are there just to get rich, a very early version of the American dream, I suppose. But they're also coming off of post-Civil War. There's not a lot left. They move west looking for a new day. And some of them descend into darkness, and some of them transcend that, as we see in the film.
Let's jump into some characters here regarding the lead. So I want you, if you wouldn't mind, kind of unpack for us Lala's character, which is wonderfully portrayed by Rosalind Chow. What a wonderful, complex character. Unpack her for us, if you wouldn't mind, and also maybe if you would, tell us what you think is important about her journey as a character for us today. What should we be taking away from this when we watch her journey through this story?
Let me start with that and work backwards. She's a survivor. She survived. She had some support, but not the support of very many women. And she just kept going, and that's what we see today when you see sex trafficking. We see so many, we hear about survivors. We don't see enough survivors, I think. Even with the Me Too movement, and like we just had, I guess, Prince, what's his name, paid his bill to,
the British Prince.
It's not Prince
I can't
Edward,
think of his
it's
name.
the one before him,
Prince Andrew, thank you.
So yesterday, he paid the lawsuit for sexual abuse and transgressions, and so without admitting fault, of course. But it seems to never stop. It's like it's part of our history as the stories come through. But in Westerns we don't really hear the stories of that many women. But here we do. We have this story that was preserved and has come down to us. So she survived, and she's a brilliant survivor. And that's, I think, what can be a boost to people who see this today. So go back to those early questions.
Well,
the character, unpacking Rosalind.
Unpacking the character, but let me I appreciate what you said, and I wonder if I can ask you this, amend my earlier question. This is a story from 1991. It sounds like it's still ringing true here in 2022.
Absolutely, and as we'll see from Nancy Kelly's interview, she talks about that and its relevancy today. She said it was relevant when she made it, but it was hard to get people to sit up and notice because she was a female director, and it just didn't have the cachet. And even today, we still struggle with parity and equity in the women are not trusted the way men are. And so, the relevancy of the story lives on. And also the quality. It was a $3 million budget, which is an independent, low budget.
From 1991 standards.
Yes. And my goodness, it looks so beautiful on film.
I believe, if I recall correctly, it took them about 6 years to raise the funds. But what they got was a beautiful independent film, free from the Hollywood system at the time, which was not favorable to the type of story that the filmmakers were trying to tell. And speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about the director, Nancy Kelly, and I'm curious what you see is important. What is important about her contribution to the Western genre with this film?
Well, as we'll hear, she loves Westerns. She loves the West. Her contribution is a fierce independence because she kept her independence in order to make this film. She wasn't part of the studio system that was kind of coming to an end in the 90s, but still, she persevered. And that would be a good comparison with the Rosalind Chow character, right? Is that they stuck to it, they persevered, they finished what they set out to do. Now, the Rosalind Chow, Luau, that's how they say her name, she was set off on a journey unwillingly and unwittingly. Her father sold her because the family was starving. But he sold her to be married, not to be put into bondage, into sex trafficking. But that's what happened. But talk about perseverance and strength and being true to oneself. And that's what Nancy did. She made a beautiful film that didn't give in on anything, I don't think.
Well, let's hear from her own words. You had a nice interview with her
Yes.
Yesterday on International Women's Day, appropriate. Yes. And why don't we go ahead and cut to that interview if we could, please.
So, Nancy, welcome. We're so happy to have you with us.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, sure. So, I've seen your movie before, and then I rewatched it in preparation for today. We're in International Women's Day and the International Women's Month. And when you made this film you filmed it in 1989. It came out in 1991, 31 years ago, and then re-released 2 years ago. Did you ever think it would hold up? The relevancy would hold up, and even more so?
I never thought about it really,
Well, I guess I should say,
when it was released 2 years ago, people kept saying, oh, you were ahead of your time and all this stuff. And I was just kind of like, I was just right. My timing was right. You guys were behind the times. That's different, but somehow that's different. So I don't know. When it was released, it was really confusing because it was in a way ahead of its time because nobody knew what to do with it. Nobody knew what to do with me because there were so few women directors. There were so few films that were where the main character was female, never mind Asian, Chinese and a woman. And so, they really didn't know what to do. 2 years ago when it was released, it was a totally different story. That was thrilling.
So what was it about the story that appealed to you in the first place? Because it's a beautiful production and you had a small budget. So, but what appealed to you? Why did you want to tell this story?
I spent my early and mid 20s working as a ranch hand in northeastern California and northwestern Nevada, really wild, high, cold sagebrush desert country. And, you had to be pretty tough. I loved that life. I literally made my living riding horses, and I had never ridden before I got there, but I learned. And then I moved to San Francisco just to edit my first documentary, which was about those ranchers and that life. And I met Kenji Yamamoto, my husband, and he did not want to be a cowboy. So I tried to convince him, but I stayed here. And when I saw the novel, Thousand Pieces of Gold by Ruth Ann Lum McCunn, it was like, oh, these are the two things in my adult life that I love, right? The Japanese American and, an Asian story set in the West. And I didn't know that story at all. I felt like I really knew the West, and that story of, the Chinese miners and the women that were brought here to, service them, whatever that meant. I didn't know any of that story. So So I bought the book when I saw it. I read it at the airport, and I knew exactly. I mean, the novel is about La Luz from her birth until her death, but I could see where the part that would make a really good film was. At first reading, I could see that. So
I think that in many films that the background or the place, it becomes a character in the film. You've mentioned about what you love as the West. So how did that work for making the film so rich, visually?
I knew what I wanted, which didn't necessarily match with what I could afford, according to most of the, producers and production designers and directors of photography that I talked to. But And Kenji, we both knew, and we couldn't find anything that would work really, and then he saw in Sunset magazine a story about the town. It was a museum town up in Montana.
Oh.
So we went there to scout, and it was perfect. And even though we both got snowed in and they had to abandon the car, in order to fly out of there because of the storm just during our scout. You'd think that would have scared us, but it didn't. So, we were able to work something out where we filmed before the museum's season, which was like from Memorial Day to Labor Day. They didn't have a very long season because the weather isn't very good. So we filmed from like late February through Memorial Day. Not that whole time, but prep and filming. So
So talk about casting the film, because you cast it very well.
Yeah.
How is that?
We, Thousand Pieces of Gold was developed through the Sundance Institute, and they asked Laura Kennedy, this like fabulous, very, very experienced, highly regarded casting director, to work with us. And so she had been knowing that she needed to help us to find an Asian American or Asian woman to play Lalu. She started to go to, like plays and things, and she met Rosalind and invited her to the first morning of our first day of casting. And she set the bar. And even though we went to New York and to Hong Kong, and we had people from London sending us things, no one ever was better than she was.
Yeah.
And it was so frustrating for her because it took us forever to make her an offer, because I just felt like we had to look everywhere, and I couldn't believe, how could we have found Lalu the first morning of casting, right? And then Laura said to me, when I met her the first time, she said, Chris Cooper is Charlie.
Oh, she had him already picked out.
Oh yeah, she was right. She was right.
Yeah, no, it's really seamless casting.
Yeah.
So going back to the re-release in 2020, what was the response of reviewers or women's groups when the film was re-released?
Oh, it was so gratifying in a way, because people got it.
Yeah.
And no one said during the first release, I went to a lot of like job kind of interviews with producers who, and I remember one guy saying to me, you're a good director, too bad you're a woman. I mean, he literally said that to me, and I didn't.
Wow.
If someone had said something like that to me during the re-release, I would have known exactly what to say. But I had no idea what to say or what to do about that, and but there was just total respect for the story. People understood how important it was for a story about a woman under those circumstances.
And she was literally trafficked by her own father, without even knowing it, I suppose, what the consequences would be. He just thought she'd be married off, but
also their family was starving, so he didn't really have a lot of choice. But yeah, I mean, she was trafficked, and she didn't know until he put her into the cart.
Imagine. And it's still going on today, in fact, and slavery, because Chris Cooper, his character Charlie, keeps constantly references this fact, is that you have no right to enslave this woman, to imprison this woman. She is a free woman. And when I was rewatching it, I said, gosh, this could have been made today.
Mhm.
This
Right.
is all what we're not afraid to talk about anymore, or we get it.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's still very much going on.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, in the way that the screenwriter Anne Makepeace wrote it, there was that moment when Lalu had learned from the African-American guy who came into the bar that slaves weren't allowed.
Mhm.
And when she got mad at Chris or at Charlie for not telling her and for just kind of letting this go on, he was just like, what are you complaining about? You got food, you got clothes, you got, a place to live, because he knew it could be so much worse for her. And he was trying to protect her,
Yeah, it was a really hard time. I think when my family lived in the Quincy area where there was a lot of Chinese labor, and in Carson City, Nevada. So, Virginia City's right there, and you did some of your filming in Virginia City. And I believe I know in Quincy, but I think in Virginia City, there are cemeteries, Chinese cemeteries for people who work
I bet.
construction.
Miners, right? Were they miners, or were they working on the railroad?
I think Virginia City was probably mines, but they had to bring the railroad in to ship it all anyway. So one way or the other, but there were also, I believe, in Virginia City, but I'd have to double check this, but I think that there was a section of the cemetery or a part of the town where prostitutes were buried. But there's something about that in Virginia City. And so when I read the background of the film and that you did some of your filming there, I said, well,
you know what? It was Virginia City, Montana.
Oh, Montana, not Nevada. Oh,
right.
I thought it was Nevada. Oh, okay. Yeah, so for sure it was the railroads and up in Montana, but
anyway. It was the mines. The mines. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, at any rate, the thing is, I think it's an untold story of the role of the Chinese in building the American West.
Yep.
So and the women, yes, but the men too. They worked for nothing, practically, and they gave their lives for it.
Yep. It's really not part of the film, but what we learned from the research that we did and from reading the novel was that that the Chinese miners, they didn't get the first choice in the streams. They had to wait until they were pretty much spent from the mining of the Caucasian miners, and then it was like, all right, now you go ahead and see what you can get.
So there's like all these different levels of mistreatment of human beings for the benefit of, at least in this country, of the white settlers moving west and settling the West. It's quite a story of enslavement of peoples, and there certainly sins against human rights and justice.
Right, but I think too, when you look at the Caucasian miners that are in the film, like the young guy who gets the letter from his friend who says, come home, rich or poor.
Yeah,
because so many people just gave up everything to go out there and try to,
to make it.
Yeah, to make it. And it's like starting a startup, right? How many make it? And then feeling like failures and afraid to go home and having, given up a lot. They didn't bring their families with them either.
Sure.
So I don't know who out of the story of Thousand Pieces of Gold, I don't know who really made it. Maybe Home King. He might have made the most.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Nancy. This has been delightful to meet you and to talk with you about your wonderful film. And may it continue to be seen and studied. God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.
Do you know, can I just go back and say something to clarify about Virginia City, Nevada?
Please.
I'd said there was a place in the cemetery for prostitutes, but actually, now that I remember, I think there's a plaque in the back of St. Mary's Church, which, if you've ever been to Virginia City, it's where Mark Twain, wrote for the newspaper there. And when you walk down the hill towards the church, in the back of the church, there's a plaque. Maybe it's to the Sisters of Charity, who went there and who worked with the prostitutes. And I think that's what it was. That's what it reminded me of. It's been a long time since I've been there, but it's an interesting study of women. And then we talked about Westerns and what makes this different. And that idea of it being about women, the woman as the hero rather than the man, is like the biggest difference. But I was thinking about a series that I saw, I can't remember, it was on Netflix, called Godless. Did you happen to see that? Starring Michelle Dockery and Merritt Weaver. It's just a 6 or 7 episode miniseries. It's really good, and it's about this cowboy who wanders into a New Mexico town that is inhabited only by women. And he has to find a way, and he does, to cope and to deal and to find work. And they don't trust him, of course, but it's fascinating. But then you look to who wrote it, who directed it, who produced it. How lovely. It was all done by a man. He did a good job. And it probably wouldn't have worked so well if it hadn't been for the strong women. Yeah. But it was about a man. It wasn't really about the women. It was, but anyway.
Well, along those lines, I can't help but think of the comment that was made in your interview with Nancy, where she's telling you the conversation she had with another producer that said, this is excellent work, too bad you're a woman. I don't even know how to begin to respond to a comment like that, but I wanted to ask you, Rose. You've had quite a storied career in filmmaking and in education and advocacy. Do you see things beginning to change, or have they changed, or are things still very much the same for women in this particular career?
Well, if you go, I have a file of celebrity photos, to press days that I've been to and press events. And I think I have very few pictures with women. I have one with Jennifer Garner. I have one with Queen Latifah. I have one with, my good friend there. I'm not going to remember. The director of The Hurt Locker, Catherine Bigelow. Yeah, but everybody else is a man. And, Clint Eastwood, Harrison Ford, those are more recent ones. But Denzel Washington, Anthony Hopkins. There's some, but where are the women at these events? Because the ones who are brought to talk to us, the stories that are brought to us as those of us writing for the faith community, these are mainstream films, but they have an interest for the faith community, but they're almost all about men. They're always about men. From the Christian film genre, I would say Protestant genre, they're films about men's stories, men's journeys, men's struggles. And there's a new film coming out with Mark Wahlberg called Father Stu. There are 2 main men characters and 2 women characters, but guess what? It's really about the men. Again, that's what comes out of the religious community. So where are the women storytellers talking about women in faith communities? That's the question.
Do you see anything that gives you hope?
Yes, because women keep going. They keep trying. They don't let go. They just keep going. When you look at the statistics, Nancy Kelly referred to in an interview that she did to the Annenberg School, a study that came out in 2019. And let's see, of the years total of 113 directors who were attached to the 100 top movies in 2019, a full 89.4% were male and 10.6% were female. But it was a higher percentage than the 2 years previously. Yay. Universal Studios seems to be hiring more women directors than just about any others, followed by Warner and Sony. Then in 2021, let's see, this year, of 60 female nominees for all the Academy Awards, some were nominated in more than one category, like Jane Campion, who directed The Power of the Dog. They represent growth over the last decade. In 2019, 62 of 225 nominees, 27.5% were women. Okay. Kathryn Bigelow is the only woman to date to win an Oscar, and that was in 2010 as a director. The only woman. Jane Campion has been nominated twice, this year and then for The Piano. But here's something interesting coming out of Saudi Arabia. Last year, a film was released called The Perfect Candidate. I urge you to watch it. It's about a woman doctor in Saudi Arabia. They allowed this movie to be filmed. And it was directed by a woman. So it's about her and her sisters, and it's all about getting the road in front of the clinic fixed and what they had to go through to get it, and the men they had to go through to get it done. So, women hold up half the sky. We're half the population. And we're good storytellers, I think. I know.
I think you're correct, because we're about to see a film that would certainly prove that thought conclusively. I can't think of a better note to end the conversation on, Rose. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And let's go ahead and begin the film. Thank you all for joining us today. Enjoy 1,000 Pieces of Gold.